The broadcast was live. Millions were watching. Ibrahim Traoré sat calmly under the hot studio lights, his posture unshaken, his face still as stone. Across from him sat Nancy Pelosi, experienced, confident, and sharp-tongued. The panel had gathered for a global leadership summit, but no one expected what happened next. As the discussion turned to African independence and the failures of Western foreign policy, Traoré spoke with strength, not aggression. "Africa no longer needs permission to protect its dignity," he said softly. That's when Pelosi chuckled. It was small, but cold. Then she leaned forward, adjusted her mic, and said it. "You're just a boy in a man's uniform. Sit down." The entire room went silent. One journalist dropped her pen. Even the sound guy froze mid-adjustment. But Traoré didn't flinch, not even a blink. His silence screamed louder than any outburst. Online, the clip exploded in seconds. "She said what? Is this real?" African Twitter lit up like wildfire. Newsrooms scrambled, millions waited, breath held, for Traoré's response. But he said nothing. Not yet. He simply looked at Pelosi, and slowly, he smiled. The air was thick. No one dared speak. Pelosi leaned back like she'd just scored a point in a chess game. Her smile held, sharp and smug. One of the hosts nervously shuffled her papers. "Captain Traoré, would you like to respond?" Cameras zoomed in on his face. Still calm. Too calm. People expected anger. They expected him to walk off the stage, to shout. Instead, he did something different. He looked down at his hands, rough from years of real field work, then looked back up. And he said, "I've buried boys, madam. Some younger than me, some braver than you." Gasps echoed through the room. The host's eyes widened. Pelosi blinked fast, like she didn't hear it right. But Traoré didn't stop there. He leaned forward slowly. "You call me a boy because I don't wear your kind of suit. Because I speak from the soil, not the ceiling. But boys don't build countries with broken hands. Boys don't bury their own brothers and still rise." Pelosi said nothing. Not a word. Online, people began crying. Comment after comment. "Why does this hurt so much? This man speaks for all of us." That line. I'll never forget it. Pelosi's face changed. The smile faded. Her hand gripped the edge of the table, just slightly. Traoré looked at the audience now, past the cameras, past the lights, straight into the eyes of the people watching from home. "I came here today not for applause," he said gently. "I came here because the world has forgotten something." He paused, then added, "We don't measure wisdom by wrinkles, we measure it by truth." A tear slipped from one woman's eye in the audience. Traoré stood up slowly, but he didn't leave. He walked to the center of the stage, not to dominate, but to be seen, to be heard. He pulled a folded photo from his chest pocket. A boy, maybe 11, stared from the picture. His face dusted and wore, his smile small, but full of fire. "This is Umar, my younger cousin, shot while defending his village from terrorists, funded by those who call us unstable." He held the photo high. No boy should die protecting a land others keep stealing from him. The studio was silent. Even Pelosi looked down. And for the first time in her long career, she looked afraid. For a moment, Pelosi tried to recover. She shifted in her seat, forced a smile, and muttered into her mic, "We all have stories. That doesn't make you a leader." Someone in the audience coughed, loud, awkward. Traoré looked back at her, calm again. But his eyes? Fierce. "You're right," he said. "Stories don't make you a leader. But remembering who you're leading for does." Pelosi chuckled, this time louder, brushing her hair back. "Africa has always had its emotions. And that's when the atmosphere shattered. An African-American panelist beside her, Dr. Io Washington, slammed her hand on the table. "Nancy, no, don't do that." Pelosi's face stiffened. Dr. Io looked at Traoré. Her voice cracked. "My grandfather was forced to fight in Vietnam, and when he returned, he couldn't even drink from the same water fountain as the men he fought beside." She turned to Pelosi. "Don't you dare call our pain emotional. It's lived. It's real." The entire studio froze again. Viewers watching at home were stunned. "I'm shaking. Is this really happening live? I haven't cried like this in years." But Traoré was still standing, and he had more to say. The host tried to move on. "Okay, we're going to—" "No," Traoré said gently. He held up the photo of Umar again, then folded it carefully and placed it back inside his uniform pocket. "My cousin was 11, he said. He used to run behind me in the village with no shoes, asking if I'd teach him how to salute." He smiled faintly, but his voice shook. He died protecting girls who were being taken. He had a slingshot. That's all he had. Now even the crew behind the cameras were crying. The audience sat motionless, like statues. Traoré continued. "Your media never showed his face. No article, no headline. Because boys like Umar are born to die quiet." He paused, looked directly at Pelosi. "But I promised him I would never be quiet." Online, the video hit 9 million views before the commercial break. Instagram was flooded with reposts. TikTok remixed the clip with soft piano music. "Say his name. Umar." "I showed this to my son. We cried together." Even world leaders started tweeting. But Traoré didn't care about that. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Umar, this is for you." What no one saw coming, not even the producers, was what Traoré pulled out next. A folded, wrinkled piece of paper. He opened it slowly. "This is a letter I wrote at 19, he said, voice trembling. "I never read it out loud until today." The studio darkened slightly. All lights on him now. "I wrote this before I joined the army, after my village was attacked. I thought I wouldn't survive." He read, "To the world that doesn't see us. If you find this letter, I hope you know. We fought without cameras. We cried without witnesses. We bled without headlines. But we loved our land so much, we never ran." Pelosi swallowed hard. No more laughter, no more smirks, just silence, deep, cutting silence. The host's voice cracked. "Captain Traoré, is that why you joined the military?" He looked up. "No," he said. "I joined because I got tired of digging graves for boys who should have been digging wells." The room shook in emotion. One crew member sobbed into their sleeve, and somewhere, far from that studio, a mother whispered to her child, "That man, that's a real leader." Traoré folded the letter carefully. He didn't cry, but his voice, it held pain you could feel through the screen. The host broke the silence. "Captain Traoré, why now? Why read this here?" Traoré looked up. "Because boys like Umar never get TV time, and leaders like me are always told when to speak and when to stay quiet." He turned to Pelosi. "But I didn't come here to follow your script." Pelosi's face tightened. "This is grandstanding," she snapped. "We're here to talk about policy, not poetry." Traoré smiled, just slightly. He raised his hand and motioned for the studio screen behind them to be turned on. The producers hesitated, then followed. The screen showed footage from a dusty village in Burkina Faso. No sound, just children walking barefoot, a woman cooking over a fire, a boy, no older than 10, carrying water in a yellow jerry can almost as big as him. Traoré looked into the camera. "You want policy?" he said. "Start by seeing us." The studio audience was in tears. In comments, "I feel ashamed. I feel broken. Why does this hurt so much? This is no longer just TV. This is history. As the image of the boy hauling water faded, a faint sniffle echoed across the studio. The mic picked it up. It wasn't from Traoré. It wasn't from Pelosi. It came from behind the camera, one of the youngest interns on set, barely 22. She was crying, quietly, but she wasn't alone. The camera panned just enough to catch two of the production crew huddled behind the lights, heads down, tears in their eyes. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was a reckoning. Pelosi tried to regain control. She straightened her blazer. Let's be clear, Africa receives billions in aid every year, and we, Traoré interrupted gently. Yes, you send money, but you take minerals. You send lectures, but you silence voices, and you call it aid, the audience murmured. He turned fully toward her. But the real truth is, Africa is not poor, it is plundered. You could hear a pin drop. Even the lights seemed to dim. Online comments exploded. This gave me goosebumps. I'm literally sobbing. He said what no one ever dares say. And just when everyone thought he'd finished, Traoré said, "There's one more truth I must show you." Traoré pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "I wasn't sure I'd show this," he said, looking down. "But after today, I must." The host leaned forward, whispering to the producer off mic. Within seconds, the big screen behind the guests flickered to life again. And then, it played. Real footage, not seen before. A convoy of armed men driving into a village at dawn, people screaming, mothers grabbing children, dust everywhere. But then, one boy, Umar, no older than 11, stood in front of a woman and her daughter, slingshot in hand. He fired. One shot. A rock. Then, gunfire. The video cut to black. Gasps filled the room. Pelosi covered her mouth. The host wiped her eyes. Traoré looked at the screen and said, that was the last moment of his life. He died buying 5 seconds for someone else to live. He turned to the audience. You called me a boy, but I am the voice of every boy you never let speak. Now people watching weren't just crying, they were weeping. TikTok exploded. Instagram reels spread like wildfire, and millions whispered one name, Umar. Shall I continue? The screen stayed black. Not a word was spoken. Then slowly a name appeared in white letters. Umar Traoré, age 11. The audience erupted in tears. People in the studio were now visibly sobbing. Traoré stepped forward. He died with no flag, no journalist, no medal, just dust and courage. He held up something small in his palm. Omar's slingshot. I found this when I buried him with my hands. I kept it because the world forgets boys like him too fast. A woman in the audience whispered, God. Then Pelosi, for the first time, looked truly shaken. Her voice cracked. I didn't know. Traoré didn't raise his voice. I didn't ask you to know. I asked you to see. Online, the internet exploded. This is the most powerful thing I've ever watched. I'm crying so much I had to pause the video. I want my son to grow up like him. And still, Traoré wasn't done. He turned to the host. I'd like permission to play one more video. The host nodded immediately. No one dared interrupt anymore. This wasn't a debate. This was a memorial. The screen flickered on again. This time it was a grainy cell phone video. No war, just peace. Umar stood in a field with the wind blowing. He looked shy, but his voice was steady. My name is Umar. If I grow up, I want to be like my cousin. I want to protect people. He smiled, a little tooth missing. And I want to go to school. But the school was burned last week, so I help Mama in the field now. The video paused. Traoré's voice returned, gentle and trembling. That was 2 weeks before he died. He had one dream, not to lead, not to fight, just to read. A wave of emotion swept the studio. Even the camera operators were wiping their eyes. Pelosi's face softened completely. She whispered something to her aide, but it was too late for politics. This was raw truth, real pain. And Traoré had one more thing to show. He pulled out a small book, torn, weathered, pages missing. This was in Umar's bag, a school book. Inside he had written something. He opened it slowly and read. Traoré read the words out loud. They were messy, scrawled in pencil, but they shook the room. One day I will be strong like Captain. Maybe they will listen to me too. His voice cracked. He paused, then said, "That was the last sentence Umar ever wrote." The audience was broken. A grown man in the front row dropped his head in his hands and sobbed. A young girl clutched her mother's hand, whispering, "Why did he die?" And across the world, in living rooms and bedrooms, millions of viewers cried like they'd lost someone they knew. I can't stop crying. This story is healing something in me I didn't know was broken. I want to name my son Umar. Pelosi lowered her eyes. For once, she didn't speak. She had no defense, and she knew it. Traoré closed the book. He looked into the camera again. To the children watching this, I don't want you to grow up learning how to fight. His voice dropped to a whisper. I want you to grow up without needing to. The studio stayed silent, but hearts across the globe screamed in grief and in admiration. As the book closed, the silence in the room stretched like a wound that couldn't heal. Then Traoré said something unexpected. I invited someone here today, he said. He turned toward the empty guest chair beside him, a second seat, quiet all along, with a microphone and name tag. Umar Traoré, honorary guest. Gasps echoed through the studio. Traoré looked at the chair and whispered, he would have loved this moment, not for the fame, but for the chance to finally be heard. Tears spilled down cheeks across the room. One of the producers dropped their headset and ran out, sobbing. Then Traoré turned to the host. I want this seat to stay here till the broadcast ends. It belongs to every African child who never got to speak. Even Pelosi now had glassy eyes. She whispered to no one in particular. I underestimated you. But Traoré didn't look at her. He wasn't interested in vengeance. This wasn't about winning. It was about remembering. Across the world, people placed empty chairs in front of their TVs, lighting candles beside them. This is no longer a broadcast. This is a global funeral and a rebirth. The studio lights began to flicker gently, not from a technical glitch, but from the emotion in the room, the power of it all, the weight. Traoré placed Umar's book and slingshot gently on the chair beside him, as if laying down a flag. The host leaned into her mic. Captain Traoré, what would you say to world leaders watching right now? He breathed slowly, then said, Power is not about speaking louder. Power is about protecting those who cannot speak at all. Pelosi lowered her head. I came here to show the world that African leadership is not accidental. It's earned, through pain, through silence, through sacrifice. Then he paused. His voice softened. I have nothing left to prove to anyone who cannot see boys like Umar as heroes. And at that moment, the lights dimmed briefly, intentionally this time. The producers wanted the audience to feel what Traoré had created. Stillness, grief, respect. One by one, audience members stood, not clapping, not shouting, just standing, quiet, hands over hearts, some with fists in the air, and in chat boxes across the world, I can't stop crying. Umar lives forever. Africa spoke today. Traoré stood again, but this time, not to speak. He walked to the empty chair. He saluted, a full military salute, the same one Umar never lived to learn. It was the most heartbreaking moment of the entire broadcast, and without a word, he turned to leave. But the host quickly called out, "Captain, please, just one last thing." Traoré paused, turned back. The host asked, "What do you want the world to remember from today?" Traoré looked into the lens of the main camera, directly into the hearts of every viewer, and said, "That African boys do not need to become soldiers to be respected. They need schools. They need peace. They need space to dream." He walked off, set in silence. No applause, no music, just stunned quiet. The screen faded to black, except for one line. "In honor of Umar Traoré and every child who died unheard." Millions cried that night. People lit candles on their balconies. Parents held their children tighter. And across the globe, a quiet revolution began. After Traoré walked off the set, the room remained still. No one spoke. The air hung heavy with the weight of everything said and unsaid. Millions watching at home sat frozen, hearts pounding, tears streaming. This wasn't just a broadcast, it was a reckoning, a truth no one wanted to hear, but everyone needed. Pelosi sat quietly, her usual confidence gone, replaced by something softer, regret perhaps. But for Traoré's millions of supporters worldwide, this moment was a victory. Not of anger or revenge, but of dignity reclaimed. Social media exploded with hashtags like Voice for Umar and Respect Traoré. Videos of the broadcast spread like wildfire. People from all corners of the world, young and old, shared stories of their own Umar. Children lost, dreams deferred. Traoré's calm strength had ignited something deeper. A global conversation about justice, respect, and the power of one voice. The days that followed saw something remarkable. Leaders who once ignored African voices began listening. Schools were promised in villages that had none. Peace talks gained momentum where there had been silence. Traoré became more than a captain. He was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of speaking truth to power. But he never forgot Umar. At every speech, every meeting, Traoré carried Umar's memory like a flame. And in quiet moments he whispered, "We will make it right, for you and for every child like you." Across the world, people held vigils. They lit candles not just for Umar, but for all children silenced by war and neglect. The story of just a boy had become a story of courage, change, and unity. On the anniversary of that historic broadcast, Traoré returned to the same studio. But this time, the chair beside him was filled with a child from Umar's village, smiling shyly. He looked at the cameras and said softly, "Today, we remember not just a boy, but a future." Traoré turned to the audience one last time. "Let this story remind us, every child deserves to be heard, to dream, to live." And with those words, the studio erupted, not in noise, but in hope. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think, feel, or even cry, please like this video and subscribe for more stories that matter. Drop a comment below. Share your own story or your thoughts about Traoré's courage. Your voice matters, just like his. Together we can change the world, one story at a time.